Excellent. So this is going through what we're going to go through today. So as I've said, just please keep yourself on mute the whole time. If you have any questions during the session, do put them in the chat. We'll try and have some time at the end to answer any questions. But if you have anything which comes up, put it in the chat, and me or my colleagues will try and answer it either during or at the end of the meeting. We'll be sharing the recording, as I said, after this on the website at a later date, and a copy of the slides will be shared after the event as well. We can save any question to the end of the session, please do, but if not, just put them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. And also, if you have any afterwards, just email or call us and we'll be happy to answer them. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to use a few key words. We'll be using VCS. This means the voluntary and community sector. Organisation and group may be used interchangeably, except specifically referring to structured groups of residents. Grant agreement, which means the legally binding agreement all organisations must sign to have their funds released. Schedule, which is a part of it, grants agreement, such as a copy of budget, and request, which is your request for funding, which can be used interchangeably with project or application. So firstly, I'm Tom. I'm the person who sees the Children and Young People's Fund within the team as the Senior Grants Investment Officer. A couple of my colleagues are here and I'll let them introduce themselves. So Caitlin, over to you.
Hi there, my name is Caitlin. I am the Interim Grants and Investment Manager. I'm currently covering for Lisa Adamant, who's on maternity leave, who will be back later in the year. We also have in our team, but not here today, Claire Whitney, who is a strategic lead for strategic relationships in the policy and strategic delivery team, of which we sit, which is within the Chief Executive's Directorate of the Council. And we also have Sue Brown in our team, who is a strategic delivery officer, who manages the community trust funds. Moyo, if it's okay for you to introduce yourself quickly, and then we'll jump to the next slide.
Good morning. My name is Moyo Adeneye, and I'm a Grants and Investment Officer in the Grants team. Thank you.
Thanks, Moyo. So that's us, and just for your information, we are responsible for kind of the end-to-end delivery of the grants program at Hackney, amongst a couple of other things. So that means design, development, and management of the program, and then the individual grants themselves. And we try to take a relational approach. So everyone that receives a grant from the CYP fund will be assigned a specific project officer, a grants officer, and they'll be with them to support them over the entire life of their grant, from application setup and grant setup all the way through to reporting. So I'm just going to quickly touch on our 2 program priorities, and these underpin the whole grants program. And they were updated last year to reflect the council's strategic plan. So these are our priorities for funding, essentially. And then what we have to kind of draw these down a little bit and make them more relatable to organisations and specific funding and projects are our 6 equality aims. These are the same as last year, so we haven't changed our program. We're really, kind of looking to give that continuity year on year whenever we can. And these were originally developed as part of the Children and Young People's program with our colleagues in Children and Young People's Service. So these are identity and belonging, being healthy, making a positive contribution, achieving economic and financial well-being, enjoying and achieving, and being safe. And what's really important to us, I won't say much more about these, but it's just to frame these potential aims and outcomes really positively and make sure that our funding is kind of striving to achieve that more positive kind of additive benefits for our residents in Hackney. So on the next slide, so this table gives an overview of the grants programs that are open this year. And obviously what we're focusing on today is project grants. So I'm going to go through that one. We have a separate information session for community chess. We also have our program launch that we did earlier in last week. But if you attend this session today, what we will do is after we've finished all of our information sessions, we will send everyone a copy of all of the slides and links to all of the information sessions. So please feel free to just kind of sit back and relax today. Everything will be kind of served up to you in your inbox. So yes, we have the project grants program this year, which has these two separate strands, one for children and young people and one for generic. So in this scheme, grants of up to £20,000 are available. And the info session for project grants is taking place later this week. I believe it's Thursday morning. So please do feel free to come along to that one, and we'll give more details on that program. And for these project grants, organisations can apply for grants of up to £20,000, and grants are eligible for organisations with an annual income of between £10,000 and £1 million. And for these project grants, we only have one round, and that is the round that is currently open. That is closing later in March. So in terms of the next slide, what we have is our closed schemes. So I'm not going to go through this in too much detail because these schemes are closed and they're not necessarily relevant to this presentation. But you should know that all of the information about these schemes, including who we've funded, is on our website. These are our specialist grants, and these are for infrastructure organisations in the borough. So typically organisations that support other voluntary and community sector organisations. Our social welfare advice, so these are for advice services like the Citizens Advice Bureau, and our community infrastructure grants, which are grants for infrastructure organisations within the borough that really work in a very holistic way with highly vulnerable residents. So that's all I'm going to say about these ones. They're not open because when we fund non-kind of project based, we like to fund for longer periods of time to give that sustainability to those grants. So I'll pass over to Tom. Sorry, you're on mute, Tom.
Yep, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so this brings us to the Children and Young People's Fund, which is what we're here for today. The purpose of this is to fund activities specifically supporting young people. Applications should be for funding for projects between £1,000 and £20,000, which last no longer than 12 months. As with all our schemes, organisations cannot apply for an amount that exceeds 50% of their annual income. And here's some examples from last year's grant include a mentoring programme for Black teenage girls to develop the skills, confidence, well-being, resilience and independence to take tangible, positive steps towards prosperous futures, and free theatre training opportunities for young people to create a play with and for primary school children celebrating Hackney's diverse cultures. Our general eligibility criteria is as follows. Organisations must be not-for-profit, value-driven, and principally reinvest their surpluses to further social, environmental, or cultural objectives. These are typically organisations such as registered charity or charitable incorporated organisations, charitable companies, companies limited by guarantee, social enterprises, and community interest companies. Private businesses and individuals aren't eligible for to apply for this grant funding for this programme. We also ask that at least 80% of the people benefiting from the funding request must be Hackney residents. Applications must align with the programme guidance for the scheme they're applying for, including start and end dates and annual income criteria. And lastly, if any applicants have received a grant through this programme in previous years have failed to fulfil the funding requirements of their previous grant, including things like returning of required monitoring forms, they might not be eligible to apply for a grant this year. In addition to the general eligibility outlined, organisations will also need to provide a number of documents along with their applications, which we use to conduct due diligence tests. This varies slightly depending on the type of organisation and if you're a structured group of residents, but that only applies for community chest funds, not for the Children and Young People's Fund. So you must be registered with articles and a constitution which kind of clearly defines the aims and objectives of your organisation. You must have an organisational bank account. Your annual accounts must show income and expenditure. In the case of smaller groups for community chests, it must be for financial and forecast, but in terms of your groups, it should be for annual accounts and income expenditure. You must have appropriate insurance and safeguarding policies, and you must be able to demonstrate that 80% of the beneficiaries of your project will be Hackney residents. Over to you, Caitlin.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So in terms of what we can't fund, we do have some hard and fast rules, and I'm not going to go through them all because they are, in all of our guidance documents. But I'm just going to speak through, I think, some of the most relevant ones for organisations generally to be aware of. So we don't fund political or exclusively religious activities, but we, of course, fund religious groups because we know they do fantastic work in the community, necessarily religious in nature. We don't fund overheads that are excessive or not really in proportion to the project cost, and this is kind of case by case. So I think the take home for this is please, feel free and feel empowered to put overheads into your budget. Just make sure that they are, not wildly disproportionate to kind of what it is that you're asking to deliver. We can't fund any capital or building costs. So these are things like, we can't fund, premises to be completely refurbished or, any kind of, large infrastructure projects. But of course, you can include, small capital items as a part of your application. With all of these things, including eligibility, including, ineligibility, the caveat is if you're unsure, please just send us an email to Community Partnerships at Hackney with kind of exactly your dilemma, whether it's are we eligible, is this expense that we want to apply for eligible, and the more specific you can be, we can give you, bespoke advice in response to exactly what you're asking. In terms of, oh, sorry, if you could just go back there, Tom. Costs or liabilities occur before the start date of the grant. This is just important to note. It's a convoluted way of saying we're not going to fund anything, that's already happened. So please ensure that if you are, putting in an application to start your grant on the 5th of March, that there are no expenses within kind of your application that predate that. And then lastly, the only one I'll kind of reference is that final one, that are any costs that are not outlined within the grant application. And that is our way of saying that we are funding restricted project-based grants. So what goes in that application, and what goes ultimately in that budget in your grant agreement is what we agree to fund. So make sure that if you want funding for that, you do put it in there. In terms of the next slide, we've just got here in terms of, the cost of living crisis, or what is kind of our ongoing cost of living crisis, I guess. And we just want to encourage groups to think carefully and realistically when putting your budgets together, factor in potential price rises, factor them in as risks, being kind of proactive in that way is not going to detriment your application at all. It's probably going to strengthen it. And what we look at is in budgets is value for money and clearly costs of budgets when assessing applications. That doesn't mean that we only fund the lowest cost projects. Absolutely not. It's just what's proportionate to kind of what you're asking, and that is kind of clear. So please kind of do consider that. Please, do ensure that you're taking into consideration paying staff a London living wage. That is definitely a funding preference of ours. We don't tend to fund people who don't pay their staff a London living wage. And it's good to note that we're not able to offer any uplifting grants once you have been awarded your funding. So if costs rise, you're not able to kind of come back and say our costs have risen by 10%. We have a specific pot, and that's what we kind of give out in this round. So please just consider that. Factor it into your budgets where you think it's necessary, and feel free to speak to that in your application if you think that would provide, more clarity. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Caitlin. So we receive a lot of high quality applications each year, and unfortunately we're never able to fund them all. So the assessment process will look at applications comparatively and take into consideration areas of key needs in terms of beneficiary groups. This isn't a tick box exercise for our assessors, and your application will be judged on how you work with your beneficiaries and how you are meeting their needs. The application will ask you to choose key beneficiary groups along with information about protected characteristics. We appreciate that every individual is unique and experiences various levels of intersectionality. To mitigate this, we ask in the application that you describe your beneficiary group and why you're best placed to deliver your services to them. With all the applications, we try to prioritise organisations who are led by the people with lived experience of the issues and or have an active commitment to involving beneficiaries in the design and delivery of your services. Our beneficiary groups have stayed the same as last year to reflect the key needs across Hackney. These are done across the whole of our grant schemes, but you will see that some will be taken out depending on the specific programme. So, for example, the last group here, younger people, we won't be specifically having that in the Children and Young People's Fund because all of your beneficiaries should be young people. All of the key beneficiary groups are listed here, and they're also included in our guidance documents, which are available on the website as well.
Great, so just a quick overview of the kind of process and the journey that your application is kind of going to go on as you plan and then submit it through to us. So obviously using the information that you have within our guidance document and the information sessions, and please read the guidance document. It does contain step-by-step application guidance and question guidance. So you plan your application and then you apply in advance of the deadline, which we'll go through in the next couple of slides. Using our grants portal. This is the only way that we can accept applications, so please just take note of that. And if you're having any trouble accessing the grants portal or you have accessibility needs, please just email us well advance in time. What we then do is, using the documents that Tom went through before that you submitted to us, we conduct due diligence checks, and this is just to know that your organisation is in fact eligible and that potentially organisations that you might be being assessed against are also eligible. And it's also a way for us to screen for potential little errors within applications and make sure that those are remedied ahead of time. So if you put a start date or an end date that is not eligible, we'll probably contact you to say, look, we think you may have made a mistake. Is that the case? Then in terms of our assessment phase, volunteers from around the council, local VCS organisations, and potential external colleagues working in these areas, they conduct an assessment of your application. Your application is assessed by at least 2 different people who then come together throughout that period, and they moderate and discuss how they've scored your applications. What then happens for Children and Young People's Fund is that those applications, they go to a panel of young people who over a day discuss, and shortlist those applications, those projects, what they want to see funded, and what then that feedback is kind of distilled, fed back to assessors, and it's brought to a final decision-making panel. So, young people are playing an active role in deciding where this funding is going. I suppose the only other thing to say on this is we then have clarifying questions. So in our schemes, we're not afraid to go back to people if there's been questions throughout the assessment process, say, can you clarify this? And just for our Orthodox Jewish community groups who might be on the call today, we're aware that Passover starts on the 22nd of April, and we'll ensure that clarifying questions for your organisations happen before this date. So just everyone should look out for emails that come from us and try to respond as quickly as possible, because those clarifications will be kind of taken through the panel. We then have a decision-making panel where we all get together, we discuss our support applications, and we make funding decisions. So in terms of what happens after that, every applicant is notified on the outcome of their application as soon as possible after the panel. We always offer verbal feedback to unsuccessful applicants. So what we do is we send kind of a generic feedback document to everyone with key feedback that was received across the program. And then for people who want bespoke feedback, everyone is entitled to that. And they just have to get in touch with us and we set up a meeting and we can take you through the feedback. Successful applicants are then sent a grant agreement, and once they have returned a signed grant agreement and have had a startup meeting with their grants officer to introduce themselves, we can go ahead and commence your delivery of your grant. So on the next slide, this table outlines that the deadline for project grants is the 25th of March at 5 p.m. So that's when you need to have submitted your application from. We cannot accept late applications. We receive hundreds of applications. So please ensure that you give yourself enough time to complete and submit. Make sure you factor any technical difficulties or accessibility issues. And we aim to let applicants know the outcome of their application from the week commencing the 1st of May. Okay, and so this is just a bit of an information and some quick links, which of course we will send to you. Applications must be submitted online via our grants portal. Those are the links there. Something important to note is that you can, when you go onto our website, you'll see apply now and continue your application. This is because when you tick apply, when you click apply now, it's going to create a new application form. It's going to take you directly into that. So if you've already started an application form, when you save that form, it's going to send you a copy of everything you've done into your email account. Click on the link in your email or on our website, click the continue application button. So it's going to take you into your portal and not ask you to start a new application again. If it's your first time applying, obviously you need to set up a login, contact us if you have any issues. And once you've done this, you'll be able to go into your portal. You'll see applications that are in progress, applications that are submitted. And if you're successful, that'll be the same portal that you use to see your reports. There are no mandatory word counts for our grants. We used to have word counts. We had feedback that people found that was too prescriptive. So we have word guides on our documents that are kind of there to say, really, you don't need to use any more words than this if you don't want, but you're more than welcome to if you feel that that would enable you to speak to your project in more detail. But just remember that assessors read a lot of applications, and clear and concise, plain language is typically what we want.
Excellent, thanks, Caitlin. So we'll go through now the sections and the specific questions which we'll be asking throughout the project, throughout your application. This is also available on our grants guidance documents as well, so you can go back through there, which also contains the scoring criteria. So everything you see on here is also available on the website for you to use, and I would encourage you to kind of use that throughout your application. So firstly, section 1 of your application is about your organisation. This one isn't scored, but it's helpful to kind of give a clear answer, a clear idea of for the assessors, so they can get a good grasp of what your organisation does and how it relates to the project that you're going to be delivering. So these first questions are to give an idea of what your organisation does and your focus. This should be a fairly short answer to give an overview of what you do. You can go into a lot more detail about why you are best placed to deliver your project later in your application. As Caitlin said earlier, we ask that everyone is a London living wage employer, and this is just a tick box to say that you are. This question allows you to expand on the question. We aim to prioritise organisations who are led by people with lived experience of what their beneficiaries face and who your beneficiaries are. Where this isn't possible, we want organisations to show that you have an active commitment to involving beneficiaries in the design and delivery of the services. Let's see, 1.9 and 1.10 are not marked, but it's also good to kind of give a clear idea of how you are making sure that the people that you work with or the people that you deliver to are involved in the kind of process and involved in your organisation in a meaningful way. It also gives the assessors a good understanding of what your organisation does. And lastly, we also have, if you're working in partnership with any other groups or any other organisations. So you might want to deliver with 2 different organisations, but you also might not be, but you also might be kind of working in general partnership with groups. This kind of helps assessors know who you're working with, what the benefits are of that working relationship, and helps the assessor get a good idea of who you are and what you're doing.
Great, thanks, Tom. So I'm going to go over a bit of section 2, and I'd like to encourage people at this point in the session, to put questions in the chat if there's anything that you want us to elaborate on. That is hopefully the purpose of this one. And if we can't get to them or they're not necessarily relevant to this section, what we will do is come back to them at the end. So section 2 is probably the most important part of your application. It's the bulk of what you are funding for. It's how you communicate to us what it is that you're going to do with that funding. You should note that we don't mark your application on spelling and grammar, but we do need to be able to understand what you are saying. So be clear, use bullet points wherever you want, and we always recommend asking someone who knows a little about your project to read through it and see if they understand, because that's exactly the perspective of an assessor. Note that we are always proportionate in our assessments. This means that the more that funding you are asking for, the more detail we will expect. We don't have word limits, as we said. We only use word guidance. Stick to the point when answering these questions, and only include details that you feel are relevant to your project. I can see a couple of questions about the led by. We might come back to those because we've at the end, just because we've kind of passed that section, but they seem like great questions, and we'll definitely come back to them. So next slide, please. So what we've got here is a couple of questions. Project summary. This is just essentially the title of your project. It's just a little bit of snappy snapshot. And it might be how you would promote your project externally, or how you might be happy for us to promote your project externally. We then have where your project will be delivered, or what wards it will be delivered in this. And what you essentially just have to do is indicate what ward your project will be taking place. And then what we like to do is kind of generate a big, nice map of all the projects taking place in our borough. And then we have our start and end dates. Remember that your project can't last any longer than 12 months from the start date. And the start date must be in this financial year. So pick any date that suits you to deliver in this financial year, and you can deliver for up to 12 months after that date. If it is a really important factor for you, allow enough time for your funding to come through. So for some organisations that maybe who are continuing a project that's already kind of, got a good amount of funding, or maybe they have reserves, they're going to be doing this project anyway, that might be less important. But if this is something that you need funding upfront to do, and we always fund upfront, make sure that you consider this in your application, because the implications might be that we have to kind of go back and forth, and you have to push your start date back as to what it was in your application. So in terms of question 2.4, this is really important. This is where you're asked to choose the grants priority that your project is working towards, and then you talk about this in more detail. So this is where you're essentially saying, these are kind of your funding priorities, and this is how our project fits into those. You should include what the project will achieve, how it fits in, and how it fits in with the priority, and how it will achieve this and how it will be delivered, who will benefit and why. So definitely come back to this as you're writing your project description and priorities, that what, who, when, where, and why. This is something that a good answer will absolutely have. And it's quite an easy one just to tick off as you go back and look at your already formed answer. So Tom, you've got the next slide.
Excellent, thanks. So there's a lot to cover in this question, as Caitlin said. So if you think about the bullet points, it's just what, who, and why. Basically, if the assessor still doesn't understand what the project is reading after this section a few times, the chances are it isn't a particularly strong answer. Explain everything clearly and make sure you're not implying on anything or assuming that the assessor will know what you're talking about. It's sometimes useful to have somebody else read the application if possible, so somebody who doesn't know the project specifically well, so you can get an idea if you've made yourself clear. You also should make clearly link between the project and the priorities of the programme. So saying we're delivering this to meet this exact objective and to meet this specific priority. As we went through earlier, these are the programme priorities which come from our strategic plan. It's best to start off with this and think about how your idea fits into one of these grant programme objectives and choose it accordingly. Some examples from previous years for promoting prosperity and well-being include an enrichment programme for young people experiencing homelessness, a project for care experienced young people offering one-to-one support in their first tenancy, supporting them to develop skills they need to manage their money, tenancy and well-being. And for the building strong, cohesive communities that are part of the solution priority, we had a project to support Year 6 children in Hackney primary schools during a transition into secondary schools, whilst positively impacting their social skills, well-being and ability to form healthy relationships. We also had a Green School programme enabling young people to learn about the climate crisis. So as I said, there'll be scoring criteria for each of the answers, and this is what is kind of given to the assessors who will be looking at your answers, at your application. Assessors give a rating to each section and an overall rating to the application based on this. For example, if an assessor rates this section as good, they will note what was missing and discuss this at panels in comparison to other applications. I would encourage you to, this is all available on our website, as I said before, I encourage you to have a look at this and make sure that you feel that you've met the criteria for each of these areas. Okay,
Great, thanks, Tom. So 2.5 is also a key question. You're asked to choose which of the equality aims your project best aligns with, and then describe how your project will achieve or work towards this, what success might look like. Some projects might feel like they are contributing to more than one. This is fine. You can reference this in your answer, but remember that it is better to align strongly and clearly with one aim as opposed to covering many vaguely. And that is where choosing an aim has come from in this program, as opposed to many years ago when you could kind of reference all of the aims, and what we had was projects saying we do everything for everyone, and that's not necessarily what we are trying to where we're trying to target our funding. Note that by this point, you will have described your project, you will have given a lot of information already. Don't feel that you have to repeat yourself. It's perfectly fine to say, see above for information on this. And if you do feel like you need to repeat yourself, feel free to be concise and use bullets. The assessor is reading the application in its entirety. Don't feel like there'll be some sections, that they're not reading and thus you have to repeat yourself. So you want to think about how your idea supports one of the grant's equality aims and choose that accordingly. So we've got some examples from previous years on the slide here. So identity and belonging, so a monthly podcast project that supports social resilience for girls and those who identify as female gender binary. Being healthy, a free hip hop dance activity taking place within community settings run by experienced leaders. We hope that they're somewhat self-explanatory, being healthy, healthy habits, physical activity, mental resilience and well-being. The one that I might not go through all of them, but Tom, on the next slide, we do have a one that we didn't get too many applications in for, so I will go through that one, and that is being safe. So that's where people are supported to develop their behaviours, knowledge and skills about how they can make choices to feel safe in their day-to-day lives. So this might be through interventions and like preventative approaches to safeguarding, promotion of physical, psychological, digital safety and well-being. So we'd really like to encourage applications in that one there. And, you know, it really is just about projects that encourage safety, security, safeguarding, you know, across the spectrum, and ideally preventative approaches to doing so that are really positive for young people. So in terms of this kind of scoring criteria, for very good outcomes, for very good answers, what that looks like for assessors is that the aims chosen are clearly aligned with the project that they want to deliver, and they seem appropriate and they seem achievable given the project activities. How they'll work towards the aims are appropriate and realistic. They've clearly outlined what success looks like and what tools they'll use in order to demonstrate this or measure it. So Tom, you've got the next slide.
Thanks, Hayden. So the next question is asking about how your project will be run and managed. For this, you want to make sure you're providing a relevant background experience of your organisation and staff. And you want to discuss all of the elements of your project planning and delivering, including going from the planning stage to delivery stage to evaluation. It often helps if you go through a project kind of step by step, so assessors can get a comprehensive picture of your project. As well as this, if you're also running sessions, it might, if you want to kind of give a brief outline of how these sessions will go, that's also quite useful as well for people. You just want to get a good idea of kind of where your project starts, ends, and what's involved in it, as well as the kind of skills of the volunteers and staff who will be delivering the project. With the scoring criteria for this one, very good answers will be kind of clear on how the project will be managed, who will be involved, and what relevant skills and experience they will bring to your project. As we mentioned for previous questions, we want organisations to show they have an active commitment to involving beneficiaries in the design and delivery of their services. In this question, we're looking for you to demonstrate how your beneficiaries shape and guide your project. The good answers will show how beneficiaries are involved at every stage of the project, including planning, delivery, and evaluation. Good answers will also show how feedback is taken and is used to shape your ongoing projects or even future projects. And if you do have feedback from previous projects, it's also good to include this to say, this is what feedback we were given by our beneficiaries, and this is how we acted on it. It's good to give examples of how beneficiaries have been involved in your previous projects if you had this, and it also shows your experience in this area if you've run similar projects or the same project several times before. For this, a very good answer will clearly show how and why the project beneficiaries are involved at every stage and how their input shapes and benefits the project. To you, Caitlin.
Great, thanks, Tom. So this next section we're looking at risks. So we ask you to tell us about any risks that you've anticipated that may arise when delivering a project. The take-homes for this question are never be subtle or imply things about risk. Always be very explicit. If your project is working with children or vulnerable people, you should always be referencing safeguarding in your risk section. You might want to reference things like health and safety, well-being, and typically the more vulnerable your service users, the more we would expect you to have considered how you de-risk. We put this question in because all projects, large and small, present risks, and you're kind of expected to complete a mini risk assessment, but quite simply, clearly outlining what risks may occur, the key ones, how these will be mitigated. A good application will clearly identify any relevant risk and will assess the probability of this risk happening and the impact on the project if it did, and how this might be mitigated in your approach. This will look different for every project and is assessed by assessors on comprehensiveness. So what a very good answer will look like in this is it will just quite simply clearly acknowledge the main risks and have a clear and appropriate response for each one. Another section that we suggest using bullets, clear, concise, to the point.
So section 3 is all about your beneficiaries. So the type of people you would like to support through your project. Only one part of this section is scored, but make sure your answers align with what you've told us about your project so far. If you told us that your project is specifically targeting people aged 85 plus, this is not the best example for this, but yeah, but then you won't tick different age groups, so the section assessors may be confused. We'll go through the different beneficiaries so you can see what it looks like on the form later. If you're targeting groups based on particular equality, such as ethnicity, be explicit about this. We do appreciate that there is no kind of one size fits all when it comes to beneficiaries, as everyone you support is an individual, but please use the space provided to describe your beneficiaries, their needs, and why you are best placed to save them. Not save them, to meet them, sorry. Questions 3.1 and 3.2 are for the numbers and for beneficiaries and volunteers. If you have any in this, to kind of make sure that you're consistent with this. We don't. This is just to make sure that everything that you've put in your answer kind of aligns with what the numbers you are putting here. So if you describe it as a small project and then say you've got hundreds of beneficiaries, it might raise a few questions for the assessors. It's not marked, but it kind of helps give an idea of who you're targeting, etc. We don't score on this and don't decide based on the amount of people that you're going for. So if you've got a larger project with lots of beneficiaries, that's not going to make it, we're not going to mark that any differently to if you've got a small group of beneficiaries. All we want to do with this is make sure that it aligns with what you've told us so far. You'll be asked to choose one primary beneficiary group. We appreciate this might be difficult, as you might feel that your beneficiaries align to a number of these groups. You can use the question below this to kind of expand on the beneficiaries your project will primarily benefit. So it's best to kind of choose one specific one, and then if it goes across different areas, you can say you can add this into the questions, into the answer below, just to kind of giving us an idea of what area that you're looking on. These are areas that we've come up from in the previous years and spoken with colleagues throughout the council to make sure these are the areas which we've identified the most kind of need within Hackney, and the groups which are most in need of our support. So these are where the groups come from, but we appreciate that you might want to kind of go into a bit more detail as to what the needs are and how your group is best placed to support your beneficiaries.
Thanks, Tom. And this might be an okay time just to respond to Tanya's question. And thank you so much to Equal Cook Together, who's also put a helpful definition in there. So Tanya will say, can you please explain what you mean by global communities? So we use, by global majority communities, sorry, we use global majority in place of other terms that you may have heard of, or that other places are currently using or previously used. This includes terms such as Black BAME, BAME, Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic, or BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of colour, and ethnic minorities. So we have heard, loudly across many parts of the council that there are a lot of people within those communities who consider these terms outdated and problematic and very labelling. And that also includes the UK government, who has stopped using the term BAME. So the feedback that we've had throughout equality consultations, and language is ever changing, it will probably continue to change, is that Black and global majority is a bit of a less labelling term. But again, a broad term. What we have in our forms are places for you to, you know, where we acknowledge that that language is general, and for you to say, you know, to give clarity around the terms that you would prefer to be used. And we will make sure that we use them as we go forward, assessing your application and potentially working with you as a grantee. And all of that knowledge is very important for us to continue like our learning journey and how we use language within this. So I hope that's helpful. And if there's any more questions, please just jump in. The bottom bit of your question is, one would have thought that young people from minorities may be more marginalised, excluded and disadvantaged and possibly in more need of positive targeted action. That's exactly why it's in there, so that you can select that, be overt about it, you describe, you know, how the people that you're working with, and you know, be explicit about who have been more marginalised and then why they need this funding. That's kind of exactly why we have the priority groups. Okay, so the next part of the beneficiaries question asks why you're focusing on this group and how you're best placed to do so organisationally. Make sure you cover how the project will benefit this group, why the project is needed for them, potentially, you know, Tanya, what we've just been talking about, you know, how they've been marginalised or excluded, and why they are in need of targeted and positive action, and how your project will do that. Bring in evidence of why you're supporting this group, and you know, that might be evidence of just your own experience working with these groups of people. It doesn't need to be, you know, literature. It doesn't need to be anything other than, you know, your experiences, especially if you're if you're led and, you know, an organisation that is by and for those communities. That expertise, you know, is absolutely valued and is probably, you know, absolutely more current with the times. If intersectionality is central to the work you do with these beneficiaries, you know, this is a good place to address that. You know, talk through that intersectionality and its interaction with your project and how your organisation supports those beneficiaries. And you're more than welcome to talk through your track record, in any previous feedback you've had, but also it's not just experience that matters, it's also expertise. So please feel free to reference the expertise that you have, as opposed to maybe a long, you know, track record of experience and delivery. So very good answers in this section will be clear on what groups they're targeting, if it will fit in well with their application and make sense with what they want to deliver. If you're able to articulate why the project is needed and benefits of the group and the organisation's you know, experience or expertise, using potential evidence or feedback, that is also what constitutes a very good answer. So section 3.4 asks you to tell us if your project is supporting people of particular characteristics, including ethnicity, age, religion, and gender. This is not scored, but what it does is it helps to give assessors a good idea of any particular equalities groups that you are supporting. So Tanya, that's where, you know, we have hopefully created a section where you might be able to be more specific in exactly the different types of people that you're supporting, if you would like to do that. Of course, everyone has the option to tick NA or prefer not to answer. That is no problem at all. What assessors will do is they'll take this into consideration at panel in relation to the answers throughout your application. And obviously we are not necessarily just making, you know, funding decisions on, you know, assessing your application in isolation. We are looking at a huge number of applications that will go on to have a huge spread geographically and equalities wise within the borough. And this is something that we take into consideration as to how, you know, ideally we spread that money around.
So the last section is section 4, which is your budget. This section is scored, and there's also kind of calculator buttons to help you ensure that your breakdowns are correct. You want to make sure that your budget breakdown makes sense in conjunction with the rest of your application. So if you start talking about adding things in your budget which you haven't mentioned previously in the application, assessors might find that a bit confusing. So as with all of this, it just wants to fit in together with everything that you've put so far and what you've planned and what you want to achieve. You want to make sure that staff are paid the London living wage, and you also want to make sure that you're clearly showing exactly how the costs are broken down. So if you, for example, at the bottom here, if you have 5 youth worker salaries at £25 per hour for 15 hours per week over 4 weeks, if you just put 7,500 for youth worker salaries, that won't be a particularly good answer. If you kind of break it down as it's shown above, that gives people a good idea of how you've come to this number, and make sure that it's kind of okay and reasonable in terms of what price you'd be expecting to kind of pay for that for what you're breaking down there. We've also created a how much can I apply for section, which will help you work out just exactly this. As a reminder, said at the beginning of the presentation, organisations cannot apply for a grant which is more than 50% of their annual income. The calculator works this out for you. So if you put in your annual income, so for example, if you put in 20,000, it will tell you the maximum amount you can apply for is 10,000. Obviously, if your project only costs £3,000 to deliver, you'll ask for £3,000. This is merely telling you the maximum amount we would consider. If your annual income's over 40,000, then £20,000 is obviously your maximum amount, so you don't needn't worry about the maximum amount in that situation. Section 4, question 4.1 is how much you were requesting for your project. You need to complete. You also need to only complete 4.2 if you're asking to part fund the project as well. And as part of the budget, we've got 2 separate columns. One which you're asking for from the council, and ones which you might be asking for from separate budgets as well. So, for example, if you're part costing from one grant scheme and from another grant scheme, do put those in the separate columns, and we'll have a calculator at the bottom which calculates everything to make sure that you've kind of put everything that you want to in there, and it adds up with what you've put on the application as well. As with all of this, you want to be kind of clear in what you're stating, and give you enough lines to go into into good detail as to how the budget breaks down and what exactly you're asking for.
Thanks. So question 4.3 is our budget table. So we have a budget table embedded within our application. This is an important section, as Tom said. It tells us about how you costed your project and what you're spending on. You don't have to use all the rows provided. There are 8 in there, but there's also space below if you wanted to add more details on narrative. There's 3 columns, one for your expenditure heading, e.g. what the cost is, one for the amount you're requesting from our funding, and another is if you are getting funding from other sources for that expense. At the bottom of the budget table, there's 2 sections with calculator items, icons. These are to calculate the sums that you've put into your table. We really recommend that you always use these and that you check that everything that you've put in your table is adding up correctly. The whole reason that we have this structured budget table in our applications is because years ago we just had people upload budgets, and many projects fell down almost straight away because their budget tables quite simply didn't add up. So by putting this in here and putting calculator kind of functions in there, it's our kind of hope that every application that is submitted is on that equal playing field of a budget that adds up. A very good answer will provide thorough, detailed and realistic costs based on the project information provided. That is really important based on the project information provided. A good budget is a good financial table is a way for assessors to seek clarity, to kind of put what you've said in narrative into a kind of financial perspective, and it can really help them. It can also safeguard against confusion. So let's say that you haven't been completely clear in the narrative, maybe saying we're going to deliver workshops, maybe you've forgotten to say how much. If in the budget section you've costed out that 6 workshops at X amount are going to cost you X to run, that's clarity for the assessor. That's something that they now know about your application, and that they can move forward and articulate that you're going to run 6 sessions. So the budget items need to clearly link with the narrative, and this just enhances the overall quality. So Tom, you've got the next one there.
So, as I say, if 4.4 is an optional question, if it gives you the opportunity to tell us where your other funding is coming from, if you've indicated you're getting funding from elsewhere. If you've indicated that we're part funding your project, but don't put anything in your answer, assessors may kind of question the viability of your project. I'm aware that it's getting to 11 o'clock now, so just to say, if anyone has any questions, do put them in the chat, or feel free to email us at communitypartnerships@hackney.gov.uk. And we are recording a session, obviously, so this will be on the website shortly, within the next week or so, I believe. But yeah, do let us know if you have any questions, and you don't have to just restrict them to this presentation. We're available throughout the period, so if you'd have to leave now, you will be able to ask questions and view the rest of this, and we'll be sharing the slides afterwards. So that's section 5 is just any additional information. This is for you to input your organisation's bank details. This helps us kind of speed up the payment process. So if you're awarded, we can put it into large spreadsheet and make the payments as quickly as possible. For you, just to make sure you complete this accurately, because any mistakes will cause issues with your paying your grant if you're successful. It's also why we ask for bank details as well, so that we can just double check them next to a relevant bank statement. So we're making sure that we're paying it into the right account for you. And also section 6 is attachments, as we went through earlier. This section isn't scored, but it's what we use for due diligence to make sure that you're eligible and make sure that the documents you're providing are kind of up to the standard that we'd want you to have. There's guidance on this for on the grant guidance documents as well. So if you're unsure of what you need, or there's areas where you can kind of look for help and have a look at ones which might be useful if you need to be making up your new documents. But as you can see on there, these are the documents which we asked for earlier. There's some which might not be relevant. For example, you might not want to include a safeguarding adults policy for this particular strand, but you want to kind of have everything else on there. If you're uploading, you want to be uploading separately. Unfortunately, there's not an upload but all button, but you have to add it separately, click upload, and then make sure that it's all uploaded at the end of the form. Lastly is a declaration. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm stepping on your toes, Caitlin. This is your slide.
Oh, no, that's all right. What I was going to do is we can fly through these kind of declarations. They're less important. They give you less information, our following slides. So what I might do is just answer some of the questions that have come in that I haven't answered already. So Chantel, I've seen that you have a specific amount requested for insurance coverage. Tom or Moyo, what we can do right now is just pull up our grant agreements and double check if there is a specific amount. I believe that if there is, it will be no more than 2 million in public liability. And for employers' liability, it's always just what's mandated by law for your organisation. But we'll check that for you. And for Tanya, will it disadvantage you if you're still waiting for the outcome of other applications for the project, or would you prefer all funding to be raised at the time of application? It's not going to disadvantage you if you're still waiting on the outcomes. I think for other funding, I think if you are waiting, what is more important is just, depending on how much it is, like if it's a huge amount, to be really clear on who you've applied to, where you are at that stage. And more importantly, if you don't get that funding, what are you going to do? So if you don't get that funding, are you going to deliver the project as if we funded you to deliver, as you said you would? If that would change, then that's important to know. But if that wouldn't, so if we don't get this funding, we have enough in our reserves to cover it. Ideally, we will get the funding. We're confident that we will. But if not, the project will go ahead as we said it would. Or if it didn't go ahead as we said it would, there would be very small changes, because we understand that there are always small changes to grants. And we work with organizations for those. That's fine. So it's more about the detail given of what wouldn't happen. Where organizations fall down in these kinds of areas is where they say, we're applying for £20,000 from you. Our project total cost is, £50,000. And they don't reference anywhere where that other £30,000 is coming from and what would happen if they don't get it. That is obviously a little more problematic. If you have thanks so much, Tom. But yeah, if you've got any more questions or need me to elaborate further on that one, Tanya, no problem. Sorry, I won't go through the declaration slide. I was just saying that's literally just something to confirm that you're duly authorised to make the application, and if you were to receive it, you're also authorised enough to liaise with us in accepting a grant contract. Doesn't mean the other person has to sign that grant contract. It just means that you can liaise with us on behalf of your organisation. In terms of what happens next, again, I won't go through these in too much detail, but as mentioned, we always receive more applications than we're able to fund. So we really will go through quite an extensive assessment, due diligence and decision-making panel. I think I've mentioned on kind of how that assessment takes place, and that we have clarifying questions. Anyone who is successful or unsuccessful will receive the outcome of their application, as quickly as possible. And we say as quickly as possible because we can't give you an exact date, but rest assured that that's our number one priority after we make decisions. We don't dilly-dally on that. You'll know very, very soon after we make those assessments, and we do have an indicative timeline in our guidance documents. As we said, everyone is eligible for feedback. Please don't miss that opportunity if you feel that would be helpful for your next application or your application to other projects.
Excellent. So this is a list of some of the key documents and resources available to support with your application further. Our website contains the up-to-date information and links that you need, including links to the application form. Our BCS perspective gives you an overview of the whole grants programme, as well as information about general eligibility. There's a guidance document for each grants programme, which includes more information and guidance on the specific application questions. We also compiled a document of general support available for BCS organisations. There's also some resources which could help you with checking your policy documents for due diligence purposes. And we've also created a few video resources to kind of guide you through the basic processes for how to log on to the application portal and such like. So these will all be available on the slides when we send them out, and it's useful to kind of have a look through them, especially the guidance documents and the prospectus. That's really, that I'd absolutely say lead those to going through each of the questions and making sure that you're answering them to the best of your ability. In terms of the next step, we've got additional support available through our team and also through our corporate partner organisations. If you have any questions about the programme, please email or call us on those numbers. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website as well. That's a year-round thing which we run, which gives kind of updates of what's happening in related teams within the council, as well as any other funding opportunities which we know of within the council or outside the council as well. It's quite useful to kind of keep up and see other new opportunities happening as well. For our partner organisations, Hackney CVS are able to provide bespoke application support through their organisational development team, and East London Business Alliance, also known as ELBA, are able to offer an application review service where trained business volunteers can look through your application to provide comment and feedback. Both Hackney CVS and ELBA's application support are completely free for VCS organisations to access, you just might have to register with the organisation themselves. So that's it. We got to the end. If you have any questions now, I'll stay on for a little bit longer. If you have to leave, or if you think of anything which comes up later, as I said, do email or call us, and we'll happily answer any questions that you might have. And if we'll try and answer every question as possible. But if we run out of time, we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. So, I'll open it up I'll stop recording and open it up to any other questions if you want to put your hand up. Thanks.